Hang on.
Okay, I think we are now streaming live. Yeah, I think looks all okay, right? Good evening, everyone. You okay? Says it.
Okay, all yours.
Yes. Good evening, everyone. Thanks so very much for joining us today. My name is Nat Tan. I'm from Projek Wawasan Rakyat, POWR. So I just wanted to say a quick thank you to all our speakers and our moderator, Richard Wee, Firdaus, Husni, Edmund. I really appreciate you guys taking the time to help enlighten us on the subject. Without further ado, I shall pass you to the one and only Richard Wee.
Hi, Nat. Yeah, it sounds like a TV show. Yeah, a pleasure to be here. I am Richard Wee, and today with me will be Edmund and Firdaus Husni. Both are renowned human rights lawyers. Our topic of discussion today is about the Emergency Ordinance 2021. Just about a few days ago, the government of Malaysia announced that Malaysia, in view of the pandemic, needs the emergency and sought the declaration from the Yang di-Pertuan Agong, and our king has agreed to the emergency. A few days ago, then we received the emergency ordinance, a copy of which now I think is floating all around the world, all around Malaysia. We will go through that emergency ordinance with the speakers and try to decipher what is it about, and even try to maybe to see whether it's beneficial or whether it is not good for us. These are the kind of topics we will be discussing later. So before we start, can I first mention the two speakers' name, and I would like to invite each speaker to introduce yourself. Firstly, an old friend of mine, Edmund, who's a partner of a firm, a former human rights leader of Southeast Asia. Edmund?
Thank you, Richard, and hi, Firdaus. I'm at a law firm, AmerBON, and I try and do some human rights work here and there.
You try. Typical humility of Edmund, yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, Edmund doesn't try. Edmund is human rights, yeah. So thanks for having being here today. Sunday evening, we could be anywhere else, at home or cycling or running. They're the only two things we can do, cycle and run, but you choose to be here. Thanks, Edmund. Firdaus, of course, is a very intellectual human rights speaker. She's spoken on many topics on human rights and very passionate about this issue. So, Fir, all yours. Can you introduce yourself?
Thanks, Richard. Firdaus Husni. I'm currently the Chief Human Rights Strategist at MCCHR. I'm no longer a lawyer. I thought I should make that clear. I was previously one for about 7 or 8 years. And now I am doing human rights work full time. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Fir. Once again, very humble. Firdaus is involved in quite a number of projects, policies, for example, on sexual harassment matters, which I think we need a proper bill there, a proper act of parliament there. Anyway, for today, we are going to discuss something which about 1 hour ago, even a group of past Bar Council presidents just issued a statement which, in summary, is not in tandem with the government's emergency proclamation. This group of Bar Council presidents, which all of you can Google and find the news later, have basically denounced the emergency ordinance. Now let's start with our speakers. Now we have a few topics which I think most of you can see is being shared around. Effectively, we will be discussing about the impact of the EO on the Rakyat, the constitutionality of suspending Parliament and State Assembly. Later at about 5:35, we're going to have a special guest coming on who will be speaking about the health policies of the emergency ordinance. Now, before we start, can I just pose a question to Edmund and Firdaus? What is emergency? When can you declare emergency generally under constitutional law? Edmund?
So there are two ways you can do it. Under Article 149, where there is a real threat to the security of the nation, and that was when, for example, the Internal Security Act was introduced. The second way is the 150 way under the Federal Constitution, which is what the PM has now chosen to take. You can declare an emergency in 3 instances where there is a threat to the security of the nation, threat to public order, and there is a disruption of economic life. These are the three grounds that the PM has used to declare an emergency under the pretext that COVID affects security, public order, and economic life.
Interesting.
In essence, it is what some lawyers say it is all right, is correct under 150. Some lawyers say that public health, threat to public health, namely COVID, does not fulfill the condition under Article 150. So there are two differing views on whether Article 150 can be used.
Okay, but Phil, what I think Edmund has already set the tone, 147, 150 of the FC. But Phil, do you think, I'm just posing a question, what if Parliament, assuming he had actually set a few weeks ago, and passed an emergency act of Parliament, where it allows the government to do certain things, wouldn't be that an alternative instead of declaring an emergency ordinance this way?
We are talking about if the Parliament passes a law to
Yes.
nation. I mean, if you're looking at ordinary law, yeah, I don't see an issue with that. And in fact, that would be preferable in that it allows for a scrutiny by the Parliament on this law, which will then be enforced by the executive. Yeah.
Okay, we'll come back to that. Very interesting start for this topic. So, ladies and gentlemen, looking at the emergency ordinance, we have had copies of it. In principle, there are about 18 provisions. It's very short. 18 bahagian saja, 18 section saja untuk siapa-siapa yang lebih fasih dalam bahasa Malaysia. Emergency ordinance ini, kalau kita lihat dalam bahasa Malaysia, di Ordinance Darurat Kuasa-Kuasa Perlu tahun 2021. So this EO has only 18 provisions. Let's try and group them together, and let's first ask Firdaus, what are your observations on the impact of certain provisions on the rakyat? So maybe you can observe and give comments, and then I'll go to Edmund. All yours, Phil.
Sure, thanks. So there are a couple of provisions that's been set out in the Emergency Ordinance 2021. But if you're talking about which provision directly affects the people, I point out a few. One would be Section 3 that allows for a temporary possession at the cost of the emergency, as long as the emergency is still enforced, once land, building, or movable property can be taken away and can be held on to for as long as the emergency is in operation. Now, you might be wondering what happens, for example, if that particular land is limited to a certain use. All that will not be of relevance, and because the YDPA or the of the person authorized by the YDPA can use that land however way without regard to the use that was designed for that land or building. Can we, let's say for example, if it's your land that's been taken away, can we say no to this? If you do, that would be considered a contravention of Section 3, and under Section 9, you can be liable to a fine not exceeding 5 million and also 10 years prison or both. So that's Section 3. Section 4 talks about resources in the sense that if there is a demand for you to hand over your resources, and resources here talks about human resources. Let's say if you're a businesses and you have human resources under you, if that is demanded of you, you have to hand those over. And okay, it's fine. And then let's say if you own a building, facilities within that building, you have to allow access to and use of those facilities, utilities, assets, and the person designed as a controller or manager of these resources, you have to hand those resources over. Can you say no to handing these resources over? Again, going back to Section 9, it says if you do that, if you say no, these are my resources, these are my properties, my land, same thing. you can be liable to a fine. 5 million, we're talking about 5 million and 10 years of prison or both. Yeah, there are also a couple of provisions concerning healthcare and treatment, but since we will be having a separate slot on that, I will not be touching on that. There's also section 7 that talks about armed forces being given power akin to the powers that the PDRM is having, in addition to the powers that they already have as a member of the armed forces. And you are talking about the powers to make arrests, you are talking about the powers in enforcing the MCO, and also enforcing other laws relating to, for example, the quarantine orders, immigration, maritime, enforcing summonses, subpoenas, warrant, all of that, which are usually the powers of the PDRM. The armed forces now can do so. Yeah, so these are by and large some of the provisions which directly affect the people's right. You are talking about the people's constitutionally guaranteed right to property, for example. Thank you.
Yeah. Well said. I think you set the tone there, Fir. I already start sharing the provisions on the screen, the English version. We can also share the Malay version if anybody would like to inquire about the Bahasa Malaysia version. Edmund, do you have anything to add to that before we expand our discussion? Is there any direct impact on the rakyat? Maybe the rule of law, their rights under the CPC, their rights under the federal constitution, rights to question, right to challenge, review. Any comments, Edmund?
Yeah, just 2 quick points. The first point, I think, to preface the discussion is that because the ruler, the king, is a constitutional monarch, the ordinance itself and the proclamation itself that was signed under his name were advised by the Prime Minister. So I want to debunk any argument or any form of misinformation that a challenge to the ordinance, a challenge to the proclamation is a challenge to the king or the king's powers. In law, the king basically took the advice of the Prime Minister. So while we may disagree with the proclamation and ordinance, we are in essence disagreeing with the advice of the Prime Minister. And it has little to do with the king or the ruler. The second point I want to make is that Article 150 does not have the fundamental liberty safeguards under 149. Under 149, you can make some laws that are inconsistent with your fundamental liberties in the Constitution, but in Article 15, but it cannot be inconsistent with Article 8 under Article 149. However, for Article 150 emergency, which we are now in that state, any law, any ordinance can be made that breaches your fundamental liberties. So some lawyers have said fundamental liberties mean that they are fundamental, they cannot be breached under emergency. But our Constitution allows for any type of breach. For example, if somebody wants to make an ordinance to say that all women with red head or red hair should be put in prison, that ordinance will pass under 150. That is how serious it is. We have not seen it being implemented as yet, and hopefully will never be. But we have already seen how, like Firdaus has summarized, the armed forces can come in, you can appropriate or misappropriate property, compensation is not decided by the courts, and importantly, or most fundamentally, you are already suspending Parliament and the state legislative assemblies. So for people to say this is what some people call an executive darurat or emergency that has no curfew is quite misleading. It has a lot of legal implications and legal effect that affects us on a daily basis, or will affect us on a daily basis. Richard?
Yeah, fantastic. So much to talk. I don't know whether we can finish in an hour. The more the two of you say, the more questions I want to pose to my panelists. Yeah, but you know, Fir and Edmund, the only other time that I can remember reading about an impactful emergency ordinance was after the unfortunate May 13 in 1969. The situation at the time, of course, it happened before I was born. We can only read, but it was clearly dire and things were very volatile. Here, what we have a situation is people are falling sick. And of course, this illness is dangerous because people can actually die very quickly from this disease. So there is a danger there. But to compare what happened in 1969 and now, how do we see, Edmund, before I move on to the next story, Edmund, how do you see that imposing such an emergency ordinance 2021 can actually resolve this pandemic? Do you think it can? I mean, don't we have enough laws to stop this? Don't we have enough system and process to stop the pandemic?
Yeah, Richard, that's a very good question. And I think that's a question that bears answering, because if you remember early 2020, we had the first MCO that was very stringent. We had roadblocks. We had people not being allowed to move around as much. And that controlled the numbers of people contracting COVID. We also remember that in a few months ago, the Speaker of the House had said, you cannot have many people coming into Parliament, and therefore some members of Parliament will be excused from coming into Parliament. But yet, with COVID, Parliament could sit. So the answer to that is that we have the Prime Minister, the government of Malaysia already has the Prevention and Control of Infectious Disease Act that has been proven to be effective, that has been used, and that will continue to be used to combat COVID. So that evidence is already there. You do not need an emergency to deal with COVID in the circumstances that we are talking about. If you say, oh, we want to start appropriating private healthcare facilities, then the question should have been, why are you not discussing it with the private healthcare facilities much earlier? Why do you need to have such a draconian law now to say let's appropriate hospital beds from private healthcare facilities? So I don't see why, and don't see the nexus or the connection between having an emergency, suspending Parliament just to deal with the situation of COVID. And bear in mind, the Prime Minister said twice in his speech that there is no curfew, civilian life will continue as normal. And when he said that, he meant that, there is no further measures that will be taken over and above what has been taken in the first MCO. The answer to that is there are currently laws to deal with it.
Yeah, that seems to be
emergency.
I would tend to agree with you, Edmund. Of course, sometimes this kind of situation, anything we say will be seen to be political. Say, oh, you are supporting one side or the other. I am speaking as a lawyer. We are looking at laws that we have. And in my view, there's more than enough laws to protect the situation or deal with the situation. Now, moving from that, Edmund, well said, very, very well said. So you have basically said, let me just summarize what we have said so far the last, say, 15, 20 minutes. Firdaus have set the tone by saying what can be a direct impact to the rakyat. Basically, the forfeiture clauses in the provision where the government apparently can effectively, if I can make it simple, walk into your house and say, I want your property, as an example. And if you don't surrender it under Section 9, you may be fined up to 5 million or in prison 5 years or 10 years. So this is serious. Then discussing with Edmund and Fir, I asked a question, isn't there enough laws? Isn't there enough rules? Isn't there enough provision? Takkan tak ada undang-undang lain? Takkan tak ada provision lain? So both the speakers, or in fact, Edmund have not Firdaus yet. Edmund have basically said, I think we have enough. We have enough rules and laws to govern everything now. So let's move now back to Firdaus. So Fir, Edmund mentioned something about Parliament being suspended.
Yep.
So it looks like when people is sick, we suspend Parliament. That seems to be what is happening now. I am still trying to figure out the connection as a lawyer without having any political thinking. As a lawyer, sebagai peguam, apakah connection antara kita sakit dengan Parlimen dengan State Assembly kena digantung? What is the connection? So can you give a comment? Is it constitutional to suspend Parliament and State Assembly? All yours, Firdaus.
Thanks, Richard. Well, I would say outside of this emergency ordinance, this is not the first time there was an attempt to not have the Parliament in session. And the motivation behind that, I think it's a suspect. I mean, we don't need to discuss here, but there are enough reasons to believe that it is not COVID as to the motivation behind suspending Parliament. I will leave it at that. Now, talking about suspension of Parliament and the constitutionality of it, that requires us to look at the function of Parliament in the first place. Now in Malaysia, the system that we practice here, our democracy, we embrace and uphold rule of law. And in rule of law, among others, it talks about our ministers, it talks about our public officials carrying out their duty and powers in good faith, ensuring that the powers that they are using or execute are for the purpose that powers is given for, ensuring that the powers that they exercise do not go beyond the permissible limit, and the use of that power or the extent of that power is not to an unreasonable extent. That is among the principle of rule of law, that we are upholding. And so the question here is that under this emergency ordinance, does this allow the executive to go beyond the powers of which they are permitted to? That's one. To go beyond the purpose of which that executive powers is first being given to. So to me, there is, this is a very important question that must be asked. And if the executive cannot answer this, that goes towards whether or not we should have the emergency ordinance in the first place.
I'm going to. Sorry, Phil, go on. Sorry, I thought you finished. Sorry, go on.
Quick one. All right. I'll make this quick, but there are a couple of other points also.
Take your time, Phil. Take your time. I'm not rushing you. Sorry, I thought you finished. Sorry. All yours.
No problem. Now, the other concept that we also practice in Malaysia is the separation of power. The fact that they has to be independent in terms of operation, in terms of personnel, in terms of their spheres or exercise of power when it comes to the judiciary in Malaysia, when it comes to the executive, the government, and also the legislature. And why? What is the reason? The purpose behind having separation of power is because you cannot have powers concentrated in one body, in only the executive, without without any mechanism for check and balance. And that is what exactly the emergency ordinance is allowing, for powers to all be concentrated in the executive, because when Parliament is suspended, there will be no check and balance by the agency of Parliament. Now, if you look at Article 150, Clause 3, if I'm not mistaken, it provides for that proclamation of emergency to be tabled in Parliament. Why was there 150 Clause 3 in the first place? Because it allows for safeguard. It allows for stringent check by the Parliament against the proposed power of the executive under this emergency ordinance. That is the purpose of why 150 Clause 3 is there. But when you take that away, and this is a safeguard that is embedded in the Constitution, to me, then there is if you take that away, as is what is happening right now, there is a plausible argument to say to argue on the constitutionality of the emergency ordinance with regard specifically to the suspension of Parliament. Thank you.
Well said. I would like to just go on record here, and I dare say I speak for everybody in POWR, for Edmund and Phil, and also myself. We're not here to stop the system, the government, to fight the pandemic. We want the pandemic to be fought. We want to end COVID-19 once and for all, as soon as we can. But we are also trying to see, is there a need to pass such a draconian law. Now, clearly the words I can use now safely after listening to the two of you the last 20 over minutes, this draconian law, because there's one missing feature so far, safeguards. There is lack of safeguards, and the principal feature of a democratic country with a parliament is safeguards in the system. Everything we do in this country, one of the biggest argument among people managing the country and discussing about the rule of law, etc., it's about safeguards. So on that point, Edmund, before we move on the issue of immunity, because I think Dr. Khor is waiting to come in shortly, what is your comment about the, other than what Firdaus has mentioned, Edmund, what is the constitutionality of this? Is it constitutional? Is it unconstitutional? We want to fight the pandemic, but this way? All yours, Edmund.
So I've said just now, my view is that there are laws that allow for the dealing of COVID without needing an emergency. But if you're talking about a 150 emergency, I must say that there have been a slew of amendments over the many years. And the last, I think, being in 1981, that took away the powers of the court to scrutinize a proclamation of emergency and its ordinances. That ouster clause, because of a string of cases, Teh Cheng Po, Johnson Tan, and the whole rest of it, government of Malaysia had amended the constitution so many times to make Article 150 sort of so waterproof. The saving grace, however, is that recently we have seen the judiciary coming up with very progressive judgments in Semenye Jaya, Maria Chin's case, although the CJ was in the minority, Indira Gandhi, and a few other cases where ouster clauses were said to be unconstitutional. So the safeguard that we have really is the judiciary now. Whether the judiciary is prepared to read the ouster clause in Article 150 as being unconstitutional, how is it to be read? In judicial review, where government exercises powers for collateral purpose or for bad faith, there is a possibility that the ouster clause will not apply to immunize those exercise of powers. So if you ask me what safeguard is there, the judiciary is there. We hope that the judiciary will look at it objectively, look and see whether the ouster clause really applies in this case. And secondly, I think in Firdaus's point about Article 150, the initial safeguard, and even after it was amended, is that when Parliament is sitting, when Parliament is in existence, you need to table the proclamation and ordinance of emergencies before Parliament for debate. And so that safeguard has now been taken away because the Prime Minister in the ordinance has advised to suspend Parliament. So the safeguard that was in Article 150 to safeguard and check and balance the proclamation and ordinance has now been removed by executive fiat. And that, I think, goes against the grain of Article 150. It is some sort of a fraud on the Constitution, some sort of a fraud on Parliament. And we would say that lawmakers, members of Parliament, Speaker of the House, should be the ones taking up the case against the Prime Minister or the government of the day, because as Parliament should be independent, and Parliament should be the one that should be scrutinizing the ordinance and proclamation as stated in Article 150. But by a stroke of a pen, the Prime Minister has taken away that scrutiny powers of Parliament. So if you ask me what are the safeguards, I go back to the traditional safeguards of the judiciary, I go back to the traditional safeguard of Parliament, and that is where the hope lies. Because with the powers that have been given under the proclamation up to August, the government can tomorrow sign off new ordinances that breaches our rights, our liberties, and affect us in a very difficult way.
Well said, Edmund. So I take a point for you, the safeguards that we have will be the courts and in fact Parliament itself. I think that's the obvious safeguard. But how are we going to safeguard the people if you look at the provisions at Section 10? In Section 10 of this emergency ordinance, if I can just quickly share this provision, apparently, Edmund, and I'll come to Firdaus after this, apparently the government has immunity. You mentioned immunity just now, so let's discuss this provision. Section 10 states that no action, suit or prosecution or any proceeding shall lie or be brought, institute or maintained in any court against the government, blah, 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 in respect of any act, neglect, default, done or omitted by him or by it in good faith in carrying out the provision of this ordinance. Now, before I let you give your points, Edmund, this is not a new provision. We have seen this in numerous provisions in our Act of Parliament. In fact, I'm dealing with some of it in my sports work. Section 44 of Akta ISN has this. So, what is your comment about this? Looking at the entire framework of the EO 2021, isn't this another provision to take away the safeguard?
Yeah, this is not an ouster completely that we talk about of the court's jurisdiction because of the words in good faith. So I think, and you are right, 10 is replicated in many other different provisions, including the National Land Code. It protects government officers, administrative officials, public officers when they carry out their duties under instructions or they carry out their duties in the honest belief that what they are doing is right. And that means that whatever they are doing is legitimized under this particular Ordinance 2021. If there's a court suit, and I understand there will be court suits being filed, if there's a challenge and the court decides that the whole Ordinance 2021 or even part of that ordinance is to be struck down as being unconstitutional, then those parts under Section 10, those parts that were legitimized but that are then struck down by the judiciary will then not be immunized by Section 10. So I don't think that we need to worry so much about this. What we need to worry very much more is about the amendments, the constitutional amendment in 1981 to Article 150 that included the ouster clause in our constitution. And that's 1508, where the satisfaction of the king shall be final and conclusive, and as well as the ouster of the court jurisdiction to declare the proclamation valid or invalid. So any court suit that's going to be filed will come up to face Article 1508, and it will be an opportunity for the courts to revisit the arguments of ouster clauses as being unconstitutional that have been decided and discussed in the past recent cases of Indira Gandhi, Semenya Jaya, Maria Chin. And only if the litigants are able to get past 1508 ouster clauses, then we are looking at a substantive challenge to the ordinance.
So let's wait and see. I mean, it'll be very, very interesting to see this EO being challenged in court. And I would definitely like to read any judgments written about this challenge. Now, so far, ladies and gentlemen, before we move on to another topic about the issue of health policies, we intend to try and wrap things up before 6 to open up for Q&A. I've already seen quite a number of questions on the Facebook Live on being posted. So we are going to visit some of the questions there. But for now, Phil, do you have anything to comment about the immunity clause before we start talking about the health policies under Section 6 and 8?
Yeah, thanks. So a quick comment to add on to that. Yes, there are string of laws that provide for ouster clauses, and I'm talking about ouster clauses in general, be it looking at Section 10 or Article 158. And there are also string of cases which discusses ouster clauses. And you can't talk about ouster clauses and the applicability or inapplicability, yeah, without talking about the role of court, the constitutional role of court. why do we have the judiciary as an institution in the first place is because to safeguard against violation of human rights by the executive. It's also what you call that, to be an avenue where there are disputes on one's legal rights. And so these are powers that are inherent within the judicial institution, and that is why there are, cases all the way up to federal court that decides that you cannot have the parliament taking away that powers of the court by way of judicial, by way of ouster clauses, when that power is inherent, is an essence of why the court is there in the first place. And if we were to agree to this and ouster clauses, you are basically saying, well, our government can operate without any form of accountability. That's what we are promoting if we were to allow ouster clauses to exist. Thank you.
That sounds pretty scary, if you ask me. A system of governance without accountability. So far, ladies and gentlemen, if before I invite Dr. Khor on board, we have discussed about Section 3, 4, and 5 of the EO, which effectively talk about the forfeiture of assets, land, building, or movable properties. Then the two speakers also assessed and gave their observation about Section 10 of the EO, which effectively say that there's immunity. Then in between there, I think both speakers mentioned about Section 7. Maybe later we'll go in more detail when we have time. Maybe Edmund can give some idea about Section 7, where the armed forces is now given similar powers as the police. And then, but there are two interesting provisions here. And this is also relating to some of the questions some people ask here, whether people are forced to go for immunity, etc., etc. Section 6 of the EO and Section 8. Section 6 talk about directions for treatment, immunization, isolation, observation, or surveillance. So at this juncture, we have a surprise speaker, Dr. Khor. Dr. Khor, can you appear? Hi, Doctor. How are you?
Hello, Richard. Call me SK. It's a pleasure to be here.
Okay, hi, SK. Can I trouble you well, first things first, terima kasih for joining us. I think we are delighted to have you on board, and I think you are the accurate person to speak on this. But before that, maybe you can introduce yourself first, share with everybody. I think there's about a few hundred people watching on Facebook. Who are you, SK?
Hello, Richard. Hello, everyone. My name is Swee Kheng. I trained as a physician initially, but then I did several other things, including anti-corruption work. Now, these days, what I do is spend a lot of time as an independent consultant with various agencies, local and foreign, and I do health systems and policies these days.
Oh, thanks. Well, you are indeed the right person. So, SK, Section 6, I'll share on the screen shortly. Section 6 and 8 of this EO deals on health issues. So if you look at on screen now, Section 6 states, and I read out for everyone's, very quickly for everyone's understanding, it says that for so long as the emergency is in force, the Agong or any person authorized by Agong may appoint, subject to conditions as may be determined, any person to issue directions for treatment, immunization, isolation, observation, or surveillance under the Prevention and Control of Infectious Disease Act 1988. Then it goes on to say that the direction issued by the person under above shall be deemed to be a direction issued as an authorized person. So what's your comment about this, SK?
A couple of thoughts, Richard and everyone. The first one is to say that the PCID Act, right, the Prevention and Control of Infectious Diseases Act, or the PCID Act, is already very broad and far-reaching, with a lot of powers that's accorded by it to the Director General of Health and to anybody nominated by the Director General of Health. That's one. The analysis is to say that it's not immediately clear how Section 6 adds on more substance or more powers to the already existing and very broad powers invested inside the PCID Act itself. That's my first commentary. My second commentary is to say that the PCID Act itself is backed up by a series of regulations, and it is these regulations that provide, shall we say, locus standi or punca kuasa in the Malay language for many of the SOPs that have been written. So it's the PCID Act together with the National Security Act that imbue many of the SOPs with legal powers, because SOP, if I understand it correctly, and I'm not a lawyer, SOPs do not generally have a power of law, and they need some backing for it. So the PCID provides some legal backing for the SOPs that are in force. So one can say then that without directly referencing the SOPs, the emergency ordinance may still rely on the PCID rather than to operate as a standalone entity as it relates to directions for treatment, immunization, isolation, observation, and surveillance. That's my second comment. And my third and final comment, Richard, is about the general, shall we say, the broader implications, not only of Section 6, right, but to other areas of healthcare and health policies and the delivery of healthcare services, which I'm sure we'll explore, but not necessarily limited only to Section 6. Those are my initial thoughts at the moment. Richard, over to you.
Thank you, Doctor. There's also Section 8. Actually, I still need to go back to Firdaus about Section 10, but there's still Section 8, power to exempt. It says here, SK, for so long as the emergency is in force, notwithstanding any provision in any written law, the Yang di-Pertuan Agong or any person authorized by the Agong may exempt a healthcare professional regulated under a law in the schedule from the requirement to comply with the address of the principal place of practice in an annual practicing certificate or its equivalent. I kind of know what this is about, but maybe SK, you can share with us what is this provision, the mischief that is trying to address.
Richard, I can't comment on any possible mischief or actual intended, but I will comment a little bit on Section 8. Before that, though, there are several other sections that will be worth looking at. For example, 3 and 4, the possession of assets and the demand of use of resources, has implications on private healthcare in Malaysia, and the Armed Forces clause, or rather section in Section 7, just above this, also has some implications on health as well. If we have the time, it would be great to talk about it, but let me concentrate a few comments on Section 8, the exemption to comply with the principal place of practice. We'll begin with the concept of an annual practicing certificate. The APC is what a doctor needs to practice in Malaysia. And the pharmacists, dentists, nurses, and so on will also have their own respective practicing certificates. It gives you a specific and principal place of practice. For example, Hospital Taiping, which is where I used to work, or Hospital Kuala Lumpur, and so on and so forth. If you're in the private sector, it ties you to specific hospitals or clinics. And if you want to practice in multiple hospitals and clinics, you have to clearly specify that in the annual practicing certificate. That's the background and the context. Up till today, my second set of comments is what's been happening in the redeployment or the reassigning of healthcare professionals within the public sector in the last 1 year. We've seen doctors, nurses, dentists, paramedics, and pharmacists being redeployed, deployed from one district to another or state to another, notably around September, October, November, December, when there was a bit of a crisis in Sabah. Many doctors from the peninsula of Malaysia and Sarawak were deployed to Sabah, and there was an exemption provided to them because they were operating, even though they were a public sector employee, they were operating outside the principal place of practice. So there's already some precedent. I'm not immediately certain how what are the bureaucratic ways that they went around this, say, the requirement for principal place of practice, but in the public sector, it's already happened. So then leads me to the third and final comment that I'll make, which is that it's possible that private sector healthcare professionals, and I say it's possible, I'm not saying this is a certainty, that given that the public sector employees have been redeployed from one state to another, it's possible that private sector healthcare professionals might be deployed as well, given the powers that are given to the appointed persons under the Emergency Essential Powers Ordinance. Over to you, Richard.
Thanks, SK. Yeah, because the EO is so big and so wide, despite having only 18 provisions, I can sense all the speakers are trying their best to say as many correct things as possible. Thank you very much. It goes to show how passionate our speakers are trying to share the accurate information. So, well said, SK. Effectively for Section 8, as I suspected, it's about the practicing certificate of the doctor. It allows some fluidity. I suppose that's all right. It makes sense. There is some benefit there. You can't always be critical of everything. And even Section 6 seems to also open up some options for to fight the COVID-19. So some good there. But looking at all this, Firdaus, you look at the way the Act has been drafted. And then we come back to Section 10. Just nice. You go back to the issue again. If the authorities blunder, make any mistake, they can be immune under Section 10, so long as they show that the error or mistake is done in good faith. And it's going to be quite monumental to give evidence of bad faith. But what's your comment? Now that you've heard SK, you heard Edmund's comment earlier, what are your views about Section 10?
Okay, so Section 10 relating to the presentation by other speakers, and yes, as Edmund pointed out, it has that good faith element, so say if there's a case of negligence and and you decided, and if that happened to you and you were the one who's suffering because of that negligence, be it negligence as in the ordinary sense of the word, or medical negligence, and then you you bring up the case against the public officials who's responsible for this, the public officials then will have to prove that, oh, that particular act was done in the course of me executing my work, my duty, and number two, it was done in good faith. If one were to apply Section 10, then the likelihood is that you will not succeed in court because of Section 10. So now that that effectively can do away with the role of the court scrutinizing or checking or providing the avenue for you for redress, to get redress where there are cases of negligence or medical negligence. So that is in effect what Section 10 did. And if you look at this entire EO as a whole, earlier we talked about suspension of parliament. So parliamentary check is out. And then now Section 10, you're talking about the checks by the court. Even the check by the judiciary is out. So out of that separation of power, you now have one body that is executive without any check by the other two bodies. Thank you.
So I suppose what your concerns are, is that when situations of recklessness, negligence, etc., the victim may find themselves unable to gain justice, so long as the other party can, the authorities can show I did it in good faith, right? That's what the summary of what you're saying.
Yes,
okay.
as per Section 10, yeah.
Definitely one webinar by itself in future. We can have just one webinar on that by itself. So coming back to Edmund, Edmund, just now SK mentioned about Section 7, about the army. Let's talk about that before we wrap up today's session and address some of the Q&A. A lot of very interesting Q&A. Section 7, Edmund, it says that an army now has a right, like as if they're a police officer. What is your view? What are your comments about this?
Yeah, so when the Prime Minister said we are not under military rule, we have no dictatorship, we are still a civilian government, to a large extent that may be true, but to give powers to the armed forces akin to all the powers a police officer has under the CPC would in effect bring military rule, military law and order enforced by the military onto our streets. And you can see that at roadblocks now. So whether you use that power or you need to use that power, is RAILA enough, is FRU enough, is a separate question. The point is the power is there. And as I've said, the ordinance is wide enough to breach fundamental liberties, and it can be done anytime. So I think that it's a very dangerous trend, and everyone should actually be really concerned about this. I noted that Dara mentioned on the chat that we are being a bit polite. I mentioned something about bad faith. I think it's very clear that if there is any challenge to the necessity of the emergency ordinance and the proclamation, the bad faith argument, the collateral purpose argument is for everyone to see. I think everybody has talked about it. It really is because some members of the ruling government have withdrawn support for the Prime Minister outside the House, which incidentally, the federal court has said is correct. Because in NISA, we said you can only withdraw support, you can only test support in the House. The federal court disagreed with us. We said that's unconstitutional. And so now you have this situation where you have SDs coming back and forth, all sorts of leaders coming to see the young di-Pertuan Agong to say, hey, I'm the one. You know, I have so many SDs. And the young di-Pertuan Agong is put in such a difficult situation because he has to exercise a subjective judgment in his palace, not in the floors of parliament, and to decide. So the point about losing power, and while as much as we disagree about it, the federal court has said, no, it's fine. You can lose power outside the House. And when you can lose power outside the House, the Prime Minister is of course concerned when friends that used to support him have withdrawn support. And just days before the MCO, I think just days after the MCO, and a few members of parliament have also sadly passed on. And so, of course, you see that balance of power now shifting. And it's very easy to surmise. You don't need a lawyer, you don't need a constitutional expert, you don't need a journalist. I think every person on the street, or most people on the street, the taxi driver, the Grab driver, would say, hey, the government has lost support and therefore you need an emergency to deal with it. So I hope I'm still being polite, but I think it's so obvious that we don't need to say what the collateral purpose is for some of us, why this emergency ordinance had to be promulgated. Richard?
Thank you. I will just say this, that we are always polite. All our webinars are always polite. After all, as Nathan will say, we are power, polite people, polite power. So we will kind of revisit the issue because Dara's question is listed as one of the issues to discuss. SK, what about your views on Section 7? I remember you mentioned earlier, you have some comments about Section 7 where, to revisit, for those who have forgotten what is it about, Section 7 allows the army to become a police. So macam mana, boleh ke? All yours, SK.
Richard, thank you for a few more seconds. A few thoughts. The first one is to say that the army does not have a traditional role in civilian public life in Malaysia. This is compared to other countries like Thailand and the Philippines, where the army has featured in coups and assisted different, say, political transitions and so on. The army in Malaysia has traditionally stayed in the barracks, and we're very thankful to them for their service and their discipline and loyalty. My first comment. My second comment is generally about the securitization of a health issue. The pandemic is a health issue that needs to be fought with generally health, and public policy tools. Bringing in the military has some advantages, but it must be weighed very carefully against a severe disadvantage of militarizing an issue or securitizing an issue. An example would be specifically barbed wires around Temco areas, the presence of soldiers patrolling with machine guns and so on, and also how we might treat migrants, if at all the army will be deployed to provide any form of treatment or immunization or vaccination, etc. for the migrants. That's my second comment. Traditionally, army doesn't feature in civilian public life. Secondly, we don't want to militarize or securitize the situation. Thirdly, and finally, is the idea of trust. Trust in the sense that health and public health and pandemics require trust. We trust the army to protect the sovereignty and the national security of our borders, for example, but we don't have a familiarity with the army in terms of them delivering medical services, generally speaking. So then they have a bit of a deficit that they have to very quickly overcome for them to be very effective, if at all they're going to be provided any power similar to police officers in the pandemic and to fight the virus. Thank you, Richard. Over to you.
Thanks, SK. I think you also kind of established certain clear points there. Malaysia is not a military country. And bringing in the military in this situation seems to be taking a huge hammer to hammer a very tiny nail. That is my view. Don't get me wrong. I'm not looking at the pandemic as a small nail, but I'm looking at the situation. Do we need such a heavy hand to solve a solvable problem, because we have seen many other countries around the globe which did it without the army, without the emergency ordinance. So surely we can do it. You know, that's my view. But well said, SK. Thank you. Can you stay till the end? SK, we're going to wrap things up in about maybe 15 more minutes. Don't go yet. I know you came in as a special appearance. But now, ladies and gentlemen, so far, we have heard the speakers addressing all the major provisions. The last bit you heard about the army coming in. You heard Edmund and Firdaus passionately discussing about Section 10, the lack of safeguard in Section 10, and perhaps relying on the two most important, particularly one which is the judiciary, two most important institutions, and the other one being Parliament, to protect us. Now, the EO seems to have been taken that away. Now, so in summary, it seems that our speakers are cautious, very, very cautious, and would prefer, cautious about the EO, and would have preferred far more greater safeguard. And I think it is universally accepted by the three speakers that actually we don't need the EO. We could have actually dealt with this without the EO. Now, looking at the Q&A that we have, Edmund, let's start with you. Back to Dara's question you mentioned just now. Dara mentioned that speakers are too polite. We all know the EO was politically motivated. Would appreciate if speakers could share what other options that the current government could do to stop the political chaos happening within the alliance so that they can concentrate on managing the pandemic without being disturbed with requests to change PM, shuffle cabinet, or even new elections, taking the lesson we learned from Sabah. Amber, you want to try that first, or you want to let?
Yeah, of course. I thank you, Nara. No, I shake my head because the issue about political confusion or chaos doesn't really arise. In a democracy, people are going to be noisy. And in Malaysia, for the first time in 60 over years, the Pakatan Harapan government took power and then, of course, lost power because Prime Minister then resigned. You have to expect that there will be breakups, there will be different alliances being formed. And this is what happened in the Philippines, this is what happened in Indonesia. This is democracy. So we have to accept that. But nobody is doing things like you see in Trump's America, where you storm the Capitol. Malaysians are peace-loving people. You're not going to get anyone storming the Kementerian Kesihatan Malaysia, stopping the Prime Minister's office from doing anything. So let's not buy into this argument about political chaos. The political chaos that the politicians have are of their own making. They have their own alliances to make. They have their own mouths to feed. They have their own breads to make. That is their own issue. So I'm saying that do not get so caught up. And Mikhail Foucault will say this type of things. Right? He will say, this is a technology of power. This is biopower. This is using COVID in the name of fighting COVID, telling the citizens, hey, you got to support the emergency ordinance because we need to fight COVID in your name. And then getting the citizens to just regenerate this information about using the power in a good way, when we know that there is a collateral purpose towards the use of this power. So to answer the question, how you want to deal with stopping by-elections, look, Greek, Batu Sapi, and what was the other one? Bugaya, is it? Right? There were three proclamations of emergencies and 3 ordinances to stop the by-elections in the 3 cases that were statewide. And then there is a provision there that the Election Commission, once the emergency ordinances stop, to have those by-elections. So if you talk about stopping by-elections, that has been done. I don't think there was a lot of protests because everybody knew that the by-elections would have caused a greater spike in COVID. And of course, now you see people also getting a bit irritated with the Ministry of Health and the DG, because you say that, yeah, get us to stay at home, but then you have politicians and you have the well-known getting off when they breach SOPs while we are supposed to settle and follow the SOPs, and we've been following SOPs diligently. But then you have politicians going off, doing their own stuff. You have no SOP when the Sabah elections were happening, when people were coming back, and that is said to have spiked the numbers. And then you start blaming us and then say, oh, let's have an emergency. Really? I think Malaysians are much more sensible than that. And if you ask me, let's not buy into this whole game. Fighting COVID is one thing. I think we are all at Edom to fight COVID. Whether you need an emergency, whether you need to give so much powers to a prime minister that is losing power is another question.
Okay, well said. Phil, you want to try that? Because there's a specific medical question I will ask SK later. Phil, you have any comment? Dara basically said, I repeat, that is there any way to stop the political chaos, to concentrate on managing the pandemic?
Well, I don't have a direct answer to that, but I do would want to echo what Edmund says, to say that if you want one move to basically put a stop to all the political drama, I think that's quite impossible. What we should be talking about is that, well, two questions. One, does the Prime Minister need that much power under the EO to tackle the pandemic? I don't see the nexus there. So that's one. And then second, are you saying that Parliament is suspended because it will then, if it's not, it will then lead to a spike in cases? We've had this conversation before about an online parliament, how other countries have also resorted to that. It can be done. It's just the lack of political will that's not there. Thank you.
Yeah, I would say this, Fear, that I observed this very strange situation, that the fundamental right of our country's people in the country via parliament is suspended. But you can still walk into any shopping mall now and walk around a shopping mall. So it's okay to walk in a shopping mall, but it's not okay to go to parliament. That seems to be the message I get as a rakyat. Really strange, but maybe we'll go shopping mall afterwards. We have a parliament in shopping mall. Now, SK, there is a very interesting question from the floor from Jonathan Fung. Jonathan Fung asks, can the government use this EO to make vaccination compulsory and mandatory, particularly since the EO mentioned immunization? What are your comments, SK?
Richard and Jonathan, thank you. To answer the question narrowly and then broadly. Narrowly, can the government compel vaccination during the EO? Yes. Then let me broaden it by making a second comment. Can the government compel vaccination with the PCID 1988? Yes. So you don't necessarily need the emergency ordinance in order to compel vaccinations, because you can also do so through the PCID. Let me set these two aside. That's the third question. And the third question is, just because you can does not mean that you should. So the question is, should you make vaccinations mandatory? And this is a complex situation. I've written about it before. You're welcome to read about it on an ISIS publication. ISIS is in the think tank in Malaysia, where we've deconstructed the question, should Malaysia make the COVID vaccination mandatory? In summary, I arrived at the conclusion, no, we shouldn't make the vaccination mandatory now, but we should keep it as a viable policy option depending on the vaccination take-up rate. So to answer the question narrowly again, yes, the EO can compel and make vaccination mandatory, but number two, the PCID already provides for such a power. And number three, even though you can, you probably shouldn't at the moment. Over to you, Richard.
I seem to hear that all the time, that we already have enough what we have now. So if I'm an alien flying to Malaysia and I'm hearing this all the first time, my reaction will be, so why are we having this emergency ordinance? That seems to be the conclusion I'm getting here. Now, I suppose to be fair, SK, maybe the EO now will speed the vaccination up. Do you think it will assist with the speed so they can cut across all necessary SOP, the red tape, and poof, just give it to us? Would that be a way to look positively on EO?
Richard, that's an interesting angle. I don't share that angle only because I think that there are other constraints to the vaccination program. The bureaucratic speed is not a constraint, in my opinion. There are other constraints like the vaccine procurement. For example, there is a race for a global race to get supplies. Malaysia can only assure ourselves for about 50–60% of the population today. Canada has enough vaccines for 500% of their population. In other words, Canada has enough vaccines for 5 times their population as of today. So that is a bigger constraint to get the vaccination ready. And then the logistics and the implementation. And then thirdly, the training of healthcare providers. Fourthly, an 18-month vaccination program to get up to 80–90% of our population is daunting in terms of the organization, the delivery, and the financing of it too. We have a bit of time is my general comment over here. Plus, there are other more important constraints. I don't see that the bureaucratic constraints would warrant the imposition of an EO just to speed up the vaccination. But this is a very narrow answer to a very narrow question.
Yeah, well said, SK. You know, I will say this generally, not to the 3 speakers. Actually, what the Rakyat really need to understand is, what are we being injected? If we are going to be vaccinated, what is being injected into us eventually? I've been trying to find an answer, a definitive answer. There have been some comments here and there by certain ministers. If anybody who's watching this live or later on watching this recorded, if you are from the current government, can you please run a campaign untuk menjelaskan apa benda yang kita di vaksinkan, apa yang kena suntik itu apa benda? What are we being vaccinated for? I would like to know what's going in my body. Now, moving on, because I know Edmund and Fir has to leave by 6:30 at the least, we have 2 interesting questions. One from the legendary Arul. Arul asks, there are at least 2 good justifications for the emergency, which is taking over private hospitals and stopping election. Now, can both of these be done without having an emergency? Phil, I ask you first. I repeat, Arul asks, there are at least 2 good justifications for the emergency, taking over private hospitals and stopping election. Now, can both of these be done without having an emergency? Phil?
Well, taking over private hospital, this was actually a question that Edmund asked. Has the government talked to the private hospitals in the first place? Did the private hospital says no, we don't care about the pandemic? We're not hearing that, and so I don't see a need why must this conversation be taken place by force. And so that is one that we have not. Well, we don't know whether the government even explored that option. Yeah. Now, as to the second one, the suspension of election, I'm going to defer to Edmund on that question.
Edmund, all yours, and then yeah, maybe Dr. SK may want to comment about that part also.
Yeah, just very quickly, what election are we talking about? You have seen the 3 by-elections that have been sort of suspended, postponed, right? Postponed by emergency. I don't see why there would be any objections to postponing any elections on a limited basis. So I think the question as to healthcare, if you read or I've watched some interviews, it was very clear from the start that KKM said all COVID patients had to go to them. Private insurance would not even cover. Government was the only one that could actually treat COVID patients. And now if you say, oh, private hospitals are not doing their part, I've seen and I've heard interviews saying private hospitals are prepared to treat COVID patients if they are allowed to do so. And so this question, again, I know it may be very logistical, maybe very bureaucratic, but to take over private hospitals, while I agree that healthcare should be made free and more freely accessible, to actually then use an emergency to take over hospital beds may be a bit drastic at this point in time, given that Malaysia has one of the best healthcare systems in the world and we have resources. And I think a warehouse was changed to that to house patients. But of course, I'm not an expert, so I'm not going to talk about it in terms of health. But if you ask me what's the law is that you cannot appropriate private property without adequate compensation. and that may require laws that can be made. The Land Acquisition Act is one example. The Land Acquisition Act is not made under an emergency. So you can have an ordinary law to make it. You can have parliament sitting to make it. And if our government or Kementerian was far-sighted enough, in 2020, we would have already had a step of 1 year to look into a law if this was an issue.
It felt like, Edmund, that it's like me trying to speak with you, but I send someone to speak to your mom so that your mom will speak to you for me. That seems to be what's happening here. Using the EO to speak to the hospital, like what Firdaus says, we are not sure whether there's a conversation taking place, but it seems like the EO is now being used for that, isn't it? So interesting to see. But SK, do you think this is correct to use the EO to take over private hospitals?
Can I answer the question in several ways? And then you'll a complete answer is actually quite complicated, right? Because there are ideological factors in play, systems factors in play, and the health policies factors in play as well. We begin with the question, can you? Of course, you can nationalize if you want to. That does not mean that we should. If the question is, can you? Yes, you can. And you will have to work out things like what is fair compensation. And I think there's a clause in the EO that says that compensation will be whatever it is, and then you cannot sort of appeal, or you just have to accept the decision. And compensation aside, right, it's indemnity, as in suddenly are you now a government servant? And if you're a government servant, do you carry professional indemnity, or how are you ultimately responsible for it? Thirdly, the leadership, the governance, and the administration of the healthcare facility are also important considerations. So can you? Yes, but you must overcome all these hurdles, which are actually very important and very large. Let me set that aside. The second question is, should you? And I arrive at the conclusion, no, you shouldn't. You shouldn't because of all the reasons that Firdaus and Edmund has already shared, but also for additional reasons, because private hospitals and private general practitioners and private laboratories, so it's hospitals, clinics, and labs, have been very happy to collaborate. There is a very good track record and history of public-private partnerships between government hospitals and private hospitals, clinics, and also laboratories. And given the history of trust and familiarity of public-private partnerships going back at least 10 years, and it's a stated explicit government policy, why are we going back against these years of relationship and collaboration? So I think that you shouldn't. You also shouldn't because although I do believe that a system needs to be integrated, it does not need to be integrated or should not be integrated by force. Thirdly, you also shouldn't because of the negative signals that it will send to private investors, markets and capital markets, and investor confidence, especially at a time when we're struggling to attract any form of foreign direct investment. Those are my reasons, Richard. Although we can, that doesn't mean we should. I arrive at the conclusion that we shouldn't.
Okay. Once again, that's why we have you here, to give such an answer. Very, very good picture of private-public hospitals collaborating. We have a question here. I was thinking we have one, but apparently there's one more, so we have two questions to pose, or maybe three. This question, maybe to the lawyers first, since Firdaus has mentioned that she's left practice, so I won't ask Firdaus this question. Edmund, just you and me, Bon. Sunita Nair asked this question. If members of the bar are collectively of the view that the proclamation of the EO is unconstitutional, as it was not debated in Parliament, wouldn't it be right for the Malaysian bar to address the issue with the Prime Minister? Since the proclamation was done with the advice of the PM, isn't this the best move forward? Edmund, maybe a short answer to this?
There is no short answer to this, Richard, because honestly, this question opens up a whole can of worms. The Malaysian bar, honestly, I didn't want to say this, I didn't want to answer this, right? I don't want to be controversial, but the Malaysian bar, not the Sabah or Sarawak bar, because we are not part of that bar, and they have their own issues, right? But the Malaysian Bar Council has, for the past few years, has not done very well in standing up for fundamental liberties and rights. I know there have been statements that have been coming up. The recent statement of emergency was really neither here nor there. And you now see a bunch of, the group of ex-presidents of the bar coming up with their own parallel statements, right? the bar should actually be moving immediately for EGM. That's one. We need to collectively, whether it's a Zoom EGM, whether it's a on-the-ground EGM, whatever, we need to meet. No emergency has gone past the bar without a motion. Look back. And even the slightest thing of a death in custody, we would have a motion. So we hope that the bar will do that. Number two, in that EGM, we should resolve that the bar files a suit against the government to challenge the emergency. And the bar supports any application or any court action to challenge the emergency. It's no use just typing statements out. And then with the motion, with the suit, go and see the Prime Minister. We used to go and see the Prime Minister walking for justice on the streets under the rain. We may not be able to do that, but if the bar has the whatever it has or not or does not have, it should have, they should actually do it and not kowtow to the government. It looks like the bar is not strong enough. It looks like the bar is divided. We see new bar council members coming in. We hope that they will, lift the bar up through its whatever straps. But if you want to ask this question about the bar, I think we have not done enough. I think a lot of members of the bar are very excited about what's going on, but also very disappointed with what's going on. And you see, even with issues of the working conditions of the young lawyers, nothing is happening. We've been talking about it for so long. And that is just my rant, but I can't remember what the question was. If that was relevant to the answer, Sunita, thank you for the answer. I hope I answered your question, but if you have another question, you can ask me what the bar should do, right? Yeah, just go and see the Prime Minister, file a suit, dump memorandums on him, get a motion, mobilize us together. Here we are like, we never used to be like this. And it's really disappointing. We thought that the young lawyers can actually move the bar much more and the new leadership, but it seems that we are moving backwards. That's all I have to say now for the moment, Richard. Maybe you should go back to the bar. Are you in the bar council now? It's so irrelevant. It's so irrelevant. I don't even know who's in the bar council membership. And
I knew that was coming.
They're all my friends, okay?
Go for it, Richard.
We together, but it feels I don't even know who the bar council members are. Ask me, really? Okay, sorry, SK, to go through this.
No, I think it's not a bad rant at all, Edmund. Number one, no, I'm not in council anymore. But I've always said that if you don't need to be in a position to serve, so I continue serving the bar as the chair of the PSDC. I'm running the entire CPD, as you know, with a group of leaders. But the bar, I've retired from the bar. I will continue to help in what way we can. But yes, since the two of us are the practicing lawyers, Firdaus is quietly smiling there. I don't have to answer. But I would say this. We must and should do more. So whoever who's listening in from the Bar Council, especially the office bearers, I know you're all my friends, but because you are my friend, that's why we are saying this. Instead of stabbing you in the back, some of you will say. All right? Now, good question, Surita. I think because of that question, we may have to do 2 more webinars. Well done. Suddenly, we're flooded with lots of good questions. We have issues about should the a question from Beth Joman. So my apologies if I pronounce your name inaccurately. Beth Joman. Should the Rakyat / CSO who reject the EO take up a case against the Prime Minister? Edmund first. I ask again. If the Rakyat / CSOs who reject the EO, should they take up a case against the Prime Minister?
Yeah, so I think the issue of local standi comes into play. The members of Parliament, Adun, are first in rank to file a suit.
Sorry, Edmund, your volume is gone down.
Sorry, I think got disconnected.
Now, might speak louder, Edmund.
Can you hear me?
Yes, a bit muffled, but
very soft.
Never mind. While waiting for Edmund, Firdaus, would you like to try this? The question is that can we take a case up against the Prime Minister if we don't agree with the EO?
Well, if so, Edmund is trying to explain about locus standi, where one has to establish whether or not one can file the suit, and if that can be established, then yes, this is one way that the EO can be challenged. And who is directly affected by the EO? I think I would say all of us, looking at the section that we discussed earlier. But bear in mind the locus standi test. Let's say, for example, when we talk about the provision on suspension of parliament, the MPs are directly affected by that. And so, yes, suing, well, if you say challenging the PM by way of challenging the EO and the constitutionality of it, yes, the CSO, this is one way that the CSO can go for.
Okay, Edmund, you want to try?
Yeah, so I think Firdaus has answered the question. NGOs come second in rank, and then the public-spirited individual comes third in rank. May be difficult to show impact because under Order 53 judicial review, you need to show that you are adversely impacted. So we have cases that have gone either way.
Okay.
So yes, of course, litigation should be the way, and the Bar of Malaysia definitely has to file a suit.
Okay. Let's hope so. Now, one final question. It's only 6:22. I want to summarize the situation also. From N Gilong. Again, I apologize if I pronounce your name incorrectly. N Gilong or Gilong. Vaccination can be made compulsory during the EO. If I refuse the vaccine, would I be thrown into jail? Any of you want to try this? If I refuse to take the vaccination, can I be thrown to jail, not just under EO, but any existing law? I'm not sure, you know.
To Doctor about that, whether or not there is from the EO, whether
okay, the three lawyers will quietly disappear, and then we let SK answer this alone. SK, all yours.
Master caveat is I'm not a lawyer, but let's look at some precedent, right? There is a national vaccination program in Malaysia. On paper, the national vaccination program is considered mandatory. On paper, this is for children, diphtheria, pertussis, tetanus, hepatitis, etc., etc. So on paper, these are a series of, I think, 17 diseases that are vaccine preventable, and that's mandatory. There are instances, and some of this data is available online, of parents who refuse to vaccinate their children. To the best of my knowledge, again, which is very, very limited, to the best of my knowledge, these parents do not receive legal penalties for refusing to vaccinate their children. That is some precedent. However, vaccine preventable diseases and a small minority, this is a very small minority of parents who refuse to vaccinate their children, to my knowledge, without legal penalties, that cannot be easily extrapolated to a pandemic that affects everyone in the population from 0 to 100 years old. And given the different scales of the pandemic and a different infectiousness, transmissibility, and the disease and epidemiologic profile, it is very difficult to argue that there should not be, say, legal penalties for refusing to vaccinate. That being said, my preliminary position is to say still that mandatory vaccination on pain of sanctions and penalties should not be our first priority. Our first priority would be to educate, to provide a reassurance, to give clear information, to fight misinformation, to encourage, etc., etc., including relying where possible on religious authorities. And we have a very good, decision by the Jawatan Kuasa Muzarakah in December last year, just a few weeks ago, that says that the vaccine diharuskan dan diwajibkan. And I think this is a great decision by our Jawatan Kuasa Muzarakah, consistent with the positions taken by very many religious authorities of multiple religions around the world. And that forms the basis of public health as well, which is education rather than punishing. Thank you, Richard.
Thanks.
Can I just quickly add?
Yes, Fir.
So yes, I agree. There should be a community approach rather than a legal approach to this. That's number one. Number two, if you were to look at the emergency ordinance, I talked about section 9 earlier on penalties, on 5 million fine and the 10 years jail. Those only applies to section 3 and 4, not section 6.
Okay.
Yeah, just to be clear.
Phew. All right. But saya suka apa yang Dr. SK kata, cuba pujuk, jangan paksa. Try to persuade, don't force. That will seem to be a better approach. Like anything else in life, it's always better to persuade than force. But all right, ladies and gentlemen, we've gone more than 25 minutes over. We kind of suspected we can't finish in 1 hour. But at the same time, from experience, where we have webinars for 2-3 hours, but after half an hour, everyone will be sleeping and switching off. So 1 hour seems to be the optimum with an additional half an hour in case. And we have now reached the in case time zone. Before we bring this to conclusion, and I invite Nathan back here, I would like to invite every speaker to wrap it up, starting with ladies first, with Phil, followed by SK and my good buddy Edmund to hopefully power wrap the whole thing. Phil, would you like to summarize your views and your take home from this discussion, your take home, and what you want the listeners to remember from this?
Okay, so the powers that's given to the government under this proclamation of emergency under 150 is wide, very, very wide. And as we can see under the Ordinance 2021, it takes away that opportunity for scrutiny and checks by Parliament and the judiciary. And that is something that we all should be worried about, because you now have our government running around unchecked. And any attempts to check that can then be met with repercussion because of the way emergency or ordinance here is set out. And that goes against the essence of our democracy, in that powers of any bodies of be it government or judiciary cannot be concentrated in one, and there has to be a mechanism for check. I mentioned earlier that there was no nexus between giving the Prime Minister or the government that much power to addressing COVID-19. In fact, you see more nexus between giving the government that much power with this collateral purpose that Edmund was mentioning. I think we see that nexus more than the nexus with the pandemic. And I think that speaks for itself as to the necessity and constitutionality of the emergency ordinance. Thank you.
Ribuan terima kasih, Kak Phil. Thank you so much. Yeah, really, really good wrap up from Phil. So basically, her summary is that we don't really need the EO. Yeah. SK, your summary?
Richard, instead of summarizing my thoughts about this, which I've shared, and I share a lot of my positions together with Firdaus and Edmund, let me project into the future. We all want to lift this emergency as quickly as possible. How do we lift this emergency when it's safe for us to lift it, right? So I would like to invite all of you to join me as we hold the government accountable to certain KPIs. And the KPIs needs to be a broad set of epidemiological and public health and scientific criteria, not some arbitrary criteria that is easily influenced or manipulated. We need a set of KPIs instead of just one, because one KPI, for example, daily new cases, is not accurate enough, it's not holistic enough, and it can be misleading or influenced or manipulated, etc., etc. We need a set of KPIs that can give us a holistic view of it. And with that set of KPIs, we can then determine for ourselves, and also using the government, holding the government accountable for it, to determine when is it safe for us to lift this emergency. This set of KPIs will also be useful to hold the government accountable for pandemic management, just in general, for getting the emergency. And I think it's time for us to start talking about different epidemiological criteria, more than just relying on one number. And the number is daily new cases. It is not enough to tell us how, say, severe the pandemic is. We need a set of KPIs. So in the coming few days and weeks, I will be quite actively, hopefully, proposing this set of KPIs to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, SK. I think your views from the health policy has certainly added value to this talk, or else it just be three lawyers talking about law. So really appreciate you coming in on a short notice here. As everybody know, SK's name was not mentioned in the flyer. He wasn't sure whether he could make it, and the last minute he agreed to squeeze his time in. So much obliged for spending your time with us. In Hokkien, comes here. Edmund, you know, we always look towards you as a member of the bar for leadership on human rights matters. How would you end this, leading this? How would you want all of us to lead this battle?
How would you end what? I think we all want to end COVID. I think we want to ensure that we are able to travel again. We are able to live life a bit normally than before, where we can see our friends. And this has been really difficult for all of us, and including government. What we want to end, of course, is the abuse of power. But we need to accept, and I've seen a lot of comments, even as we speak now, how can people say, how can politicians act like this? How can politicians behave like this? We have to accept that there will be politicians, or there are politicians, or the whole genre of politicians will be politicians that will act in their self-interest. I think it is no different from any other country. So let us not continue to live under the illusion that politicians will act really in your or my interest, or in the ordinary rakyat's interest. Politicians will always act self-interestedly. The question is, how do we stop them? How do we limit them in acting in bad faith or for collateral purpose? And that is where maybe the next topic is for us to really start talking about, and this is what Chin Huat has said a few times, the professionalization of civil society work, professionalization of bar work. Many years ago, I remember trying to move motion to professionalize the officers of the office bearers, that they take time off and really just spend time doing bar council work. Professionalization of opposition politics. You have opposition politicians that still need to become, to mature from being amateurish to a bit more opposition, to act in a government in waiting. And the Pakatan Harapan experience has shown that when you come into government, you have so many different type of considerations that need to be borne in mind. Professionalization of bureaucracy. How do we engage a bureaucracy in such a way that makes sure that abuse of power and checks and balances are in place? And of course, that's a topic for another day. I think when we want to fight the system, and the message you asked me, my parting message is to fight the system, fight the establishment, fight the emergency, fight abuse of power. We need to have the tools. And of course, we have the tools all around us. But we do not have people saying, hey, let's mobilize all the tools together. Let's bring in all the professionals, not just the lawyers, the MMA, the medical professionals, the engineers, academics, professionalize it. And then I think we will have a better Malaysia, a better democracy moving forward. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you very much, speakers. I think we will also be definitely fighting the pandemic. I want to repeat this because I don't want this to be seen to be a EO bashing session. We are not. This is a cry out that we want this pandemic to stop, but at the same time, we are also making sure safeguards remain in position and in place for Malaysia. So before I hand over the mic to Nathan, can I invite everybody to give a round of applause to our speakers who prepared very well and very hard for this. They clearly shared a lot of good information with us. And I will end my parting comment, like all my other webinars, is that we are going to fight this and we will prevail, and together we will prevail. So Nathan, all yours.
Thanks very much, Richard. First of all, my name is Nat, not Nathan. I know, but it's okay. It's okay, it's okay. So at Projek Wawasan Rakyat POWR here, we are very passionate about trying to redefine democracy. And part of that, a big part of that is having more fact-based discourse, having more diversity of perspectives, and being able to discuss those different perspectives in a mature, rakyat-centric and apolitical way, which I think, and so I really have to thank all three speakers, Edmund, Firdaus, Dr. Khor, for putting in the preparation, the work to really make this a high-quality discourse. Thank you very much to our audience who've been very kind in complementing the work as well, speakers, and thank you for staying with us and making this a success. And of course, thanks very much to Richard, who did an excellent job moderating a very entertaining show. Good stuff. All right, we'll keep it short. Thanks very much, guys. All the best. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everyone. Bye.
Yep.
Thanks to audience as well.
Okay.